Welcome to the International Spy Museum. I'm Shauna Oltmans. I am the manager of museum programs and experiences here at the museum. We are delighted to have you with us for The Last Assignment with Erika Robuck and Ellen McCarthy. Erika is the national best-selling author of biographical fiction, including The Invisible Woman and Sisters of Night and Fog, based on the true stories of World War II spies. She will be interviewed about her new book, The Last Assignment, by Ellen, who has formerly been Assistant Secretary of State for the Bureau of Intelligence and Research, Chief Operating Officer of the National Geospatial-Intelligence Agency, and Director of Intelligence Operations, Strategy, and Policy for the United States Coast Guard. And without further ado, Erika and Ellen.
Thank you so much. Thank
you. Thank you for coming.
I mean, I'm so grateful. This is, I think, my third or fourth time I've got a chance to interview you, Erika, and I feel like you've been become such a good friend as a result of all of this, that I'm just so grateful for this opportunity to be here with you. You know, the Spy Museum is dedicated to hidden stories, espionage, and intelligence. And, you know, no one brings those stories quite to life. I mean, even the Bond car exhibit, which is super cool, but Erika Robuck, you may be as cool as that Bond car exhibit.
That is simply
you
not
notice
true,
I didn't say cooler,
but I thank you very much
as
for
cool.
That. My teenage sons would
yes.
disagree, but
yes. No, you're pretty badass. I'll just say that.
Thank you.
So as Shanna said, you know, Erika has been writing about the untold stories of women for quite a few years, about Zelda Fitzgerald, Hemingway's girl, Maria. But I have to say that I first got to know Erika when she wrote about Virginia Hall in The Invisible Woman. And just a quick story why. I was actually running the Bureau of Intelligence and Research at the time, and I was really fascinated to learn that INR at the State Department, it's the intel organization at State, and I think there's a few State Department people here or online, so shout outs to you, is the last operational component of the Office of Strategic Services run by Wild Bill Donovan. It's still in operation. It's still mighty fine, pretty good. And I was learning more about its history, INR with the OSS, and so I started reading everything I could about Wild Bill and the OSS. And one of the books I read was The Invisible Woman by no other than Erika Robuck. And I was immediately a fan, immediately drawn to you at that moment. And actually, that's where I think we first developed this friendship. You know, really the story of Virginia Hall, if you're not familiar with it, is one worth reading. She, you know, entered occupied France, was enemy number one by the Gestapo, and, you know, very much contributed to our success with D-Day and, of course, with the outcome of World War II. So much so that Erika and I have partnered an effort to try and get Virginia a Medal of Honor. And we can talk about that at another event if the Spy Museum wants to invite us back. But that was the first of what would be a couple more books about, actually your next three books had some connection to spies. Shanna mentioned The Sisters of Night and Fog. And then Last 12 Miles, which you just wrote, had a Coast Guard connection and an intelligence connection. So I would encourage you, if you haven't read the books that have preceded this one, please do. And I think, you know, I've said to you before, Erika, I feel like you're one of us now. It feels like all of your books and somehow
that's a huge compliment.
And tonight I'm just so happy to be able to talk about The Last Assignment. And I think the other thing, and just, again, this is about you, we'll get to the book, you and Dickey, but I just will say that the thing that has so resonated with me about your writing is, in the case of this book, my first job out of college was as a freelance reporter in Annapolis, Maryland. And while this is not about me, I think when you read Erika's books, you feel like you're a part of the story. I don't know what it is. I don't know how you do that. But every book I read, I feel this connection to someone, something, some event. So I think that's your secret sauce. But now we're going to talk about you and Dickey. So Erika, how did you first discover Dickey, and what drew you to write about her?
Dickey Chapelle is like no one I have researched before, and there were a number of years she was, I call it haunting me. So she'll pop up in research when I'm researching women in war, women in intelligence, photographers, and she kept popping up. But because she was a combat correspondent who had covered 7 conflicts, I just felt like that was a lot of war for one book, and I was like, I'm not going to do that. And then there were some areas of it that were very harrowing, and I just felt like, oh, I'll stay away. Well, these subjects, I dream about them. I have all of these strange things that happen. And for some reason, I got my hands, I don't even know how, on a podcast with Dickey being interviewed. The nice thing about a more contemporary subject is you have more access to media. And even though it was 50s and 60s largely, I had her voice in a radio program. And I thought, all right, I'll go on my hike today. I'll listen to her, and then I'll know if there's a connection and I should explore this. And as soon as I turned it on and she's introduced, I hear in my voice this gravelly, sassy smoker's voice, and laughing so hard she starts coughing, and it sounded exactly like my late grandmother. Like everything about it. I felt like Gramsci was in my ear, and I just laughed out loud, and I felt like, all right, I'll take a look into this. So I started digging deeper into Dickey's story and getting to know her, and there was no turning back. I was completely obsessed.
When you said voice, I immediately thought smoking, because that was so prevalent.
Yeah.
Like she was always,
Yes.
no matter where she was
Yes.
smoking.
And she was
Yeah.
very brash and had a very much ask forgiveness, never permission attitude. And so I felt like I knew her through my grandmother. So that was very helpful.
Was your grandmother
Yes,
just like, was she sort of this not follow the rules, just
correct.
go?
Yes, she's been an inspiration along the way.
That explains you a lot.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I described you earlier. You're feisty, so that's
Feisty, but we did get here on time, right? That was rule following. Yeah.
following,
Mhm,
feisty.
yeah.
So as you mentioned, Dickey covered 7 major conflicts from World War II to Vietnam. Which wars did you choose to? I mean, she was in a lot, but you didn't focus on all of them.
Yeah.
Although the
I mean,
Hungary piece, I also found very you chose what made you chose the?
Well, when I commit to a subject, I just immerse myself in everything I can about their lives, reading everything I can, looking at everything, interviewing everyone I can. I mean, I'm not a biographer, so I certainly wasn't going to cover every single war that she did. And I wanted to find something that was relevant to the present day, that felt like fresh territory. I had done 2 books with World War II, and to research that twice and write it, I really kind of immersed myself in the subject, and I had enough of that. So I picked different wars with different harrowing experiences. And it became pretty clear that Hungary, the Hungarian Revolution, the Cuban Revolution, and Vietnam had some thematic elements that were tying them together, and the origin of a lot of the conflicts, the time period. So they rose to the top. And then it ended up working out beautifully. When I structure my books, I try to do a hero's journey. So we have 3 adventures, their successes, their failures, and they rose to the top throughout the process.
Yeah, I remember you saying years ago that you were not going to do any more World War II, and you were true to your word. So
Yes, and I mean, it's part
Yeah.
of Dickey's backstory, and it's important. So we touch on that through memory a little bit, but I didn't want to go back in there, at least not for a long time.
take a break.
Mm-hmm.
Can you share a little bit about what your research process looks like? Which sources end up being the most valuable in this journey?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I love research, and I'm actually not a very creative. I don't make things up. I find things. So I feel like that's my skill, is to find the woman or the man and then research them and then tell you what happened to them. Because my friends who write contemporary fiction, I have no idea where they made this stuff up. But with Dickey, it's been great. Again, a more contemporary source. She donated all of her papers to the University of Wisconsin, the Wisconsin Historical Society. Most of it's digitized. What wasn't, I was able to have the librarian, I would say, I need a letter from 1956 that she sent to Tony, and they would send it to me. And so it was just a really easy process in terms of that. And then newspapers.com, for anyone, I know some writers are here, but contemporary fiction, set anything 20th century beyond, is an incredible resource. So not only did I have articles about Dickey and the things she was experiencing, and then even just the ads for the American people in the 1950s to see what's going on culturally and what the mindset is, tremendously helpful. And then Dickey's photographs, that became a huge resource. So they're all digitized, and I made a Pinterest page during the research of all of the most important pictures from the book. So now I make that public once the book comes out, and you can actually see some of the pictures. And then, just wherever I can, listening to her to try to get into character, for lack of a better term. So the resources are all
So
really
it's a
helpful.
little bit easier because she is more contemporary, given that you have all that.
It was
Yeah.
much easier actually. Because most of the things I've gone everything from the 19th century to early 20th. It was much easier than any of that. So
She donated her records while she was still alive.
mhm.
Like,
Yeah,
what do you think? We haven't talked about this, but
yeah.
that's kind of interesting that she's donating her life's work while she still,
Hmm.
by all rights, still had she had a runway in front of her if things hadn't turned out the way they turned out. So,
Well, Dickey also knew she had 9 lives and she'd been through about 17 of them. So when you're a combat correspondent and you're certified to jump into combat from a helicopter with special forces, maybe,
Yeah.
you don't know how it's always going to go. And I think she had a little bit of a premonition that perhaps the way she lived her life, she kind of knew how it was probably going to go down.
Right.
And so when she got a little bit older, and also just from a functional perspective, she had a little 1-bedroom apartment in Manhattan, and it was full of stuff. I mean, all of her ephemera that she was collecting everywhere she went. And so she started to relieve herself of some of it, almost the way I say like nesting when you're about to have
Yeah.
a baby. But then the rest of it was boxed up and went to the Historical Society in her will through her photo agent.
she did. It was pretty amazing that she was jumping out of helicopters while smoking all those cigarettes and living in very tough situations.
Yeah.
And emotionally dealing with lots of things, distance from her family, the people she was closest to.
Yeah, but she really felt a calling. And I think I think all of us, for whatever we do for different things, when you feel a call to it, you kind of, I believe, have the grace to do it. And, she did. And she also didn't have any dependents. She didn't have any children. By the way, if you're writing historical fiction, unmarried, childless women are very helpful to write about because you don't have anybody to yell at you. So.
And you probably don't have to worry about the family as much, especially if you're writing about contemporary people. I think we've talked about this in the past, that don't you have to be very careful as
Yes.
you're interviewing family members because you're seeing them the way they are, and the family members may be seeing the way they think they should be.
Yes.
So.
And when there are living children, I do reach out to the children. But beyond that, I typically don't, because I've found some interesting situations where, as a researcher, I know more than family members do, and through the archives that I have access to. So there was a situation with one of my previous novels where I asked the son of one of the women I was writing about, when did your aunt and uncle get your parents involved in the Comet resistance line? And he said, my aunt and uncle weren't in the Comet resistance line.
Oops.
And I said, yes, they were, and they got your parents in it. And he was like, I got to call my cousin. I'll talk to you later. So it's just kind of a fine line. But if there are children, I do interview. But Dickey didn't have any. So
My mom always thought we were French, and then we did Ancestry and found out we're not French, and that was very disappointing.
how exciting! Yeah.
So, being Irish is not that bad. So Dickey crossed paths with so many well-known figures. Who among them was the most compelling to you, and why?
A person that really surprised me was James Michener. When I go to book clubs all the time, and we inevitably start talking about what got you into historical fiction, and somebody always says, oh, it was Michener's Hawaii, or Michener's Chesapeake, or The Source. Always somebody brings him up. And so when I was researching this, and Dickey is at the Hungarian Revolution, and they're at the border with the refugees, and in comes James and Mary Michener. Mary stayed back at the hotel, but Dickey got to be really close friends with the two of them. And I just was so interested to read about his life. That's one of the fun things about writing about real people, is all of the, I guess, Easter eggs from real life that come through. So I enjoyed that. But there's another one I liked even more. I think
we're going to talk about that.
We'll
one
probably
a little
talk
bit.
about him in a little bit.
That one. But I have to say, I think this is my favorite of all your books, and maybe it's because there
thank
is
you.
this. Because I know, you just feel a connection. And James Michener was one of them. To think that they took her in. When she was the most down, they were really just friends. It was a different era.
Yeah, and without revealing too much, they were involved in some diplomacy that helped Dickey a lot. And without Mary Michener in particular, I don't know if things would have turned out the way they did, for the better.
Yeah, I think that's a good one to pick as your favorite one.
Mm-hmm.
But we'll talk about the other one next.
Yes.
So, she also had a connection with Wild Bill Donovan.
She did. Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about their relationship and how it might have shaped her and her perspective?
Sure. I was very interested to learn about this connection and about some of the uses of care and journalistic agencies for intelligence. So I was able to sort of deep dive into that and really reached into the International Rescue Committee, which had been started during World War II by Einstein and a few people to help refugees in war-torn areas and get them out and get medical supplies and so forth. And it grew from there and continued. Dickey ended up doing publicity for them. And during the Hungarian Revolution, they were given permission to get antibiotics. Pfizer donated an unbelievable amount of antibiotics to the refugees that were coming over. A lot of the babies and the children were suffering from pneumonia. And so they were trying to get them there. And it was at the border helping the refugees that she met Wild Bill. Wild Bill was on the board of the IRC. And he also was helpful to Dickey in different ways. But yeah, it was very interesting that he was so involved in that organization. So
just diving into Wild
make
Bill.
of that what you will.
Can we just dive in a little more into Wild Bill? And again, the things we haven't talked about.
He always steals the show, yeah.
But Wild Bill does steal the show. I guess what I found so compelling was this was post-World War II.
Mm-hmm.
So the OSS had been disestablished by President Truman. He was a little bit lost because he always wanted to lead the stand-up of an independent intelligence organization. And so when I wasn't expecting to see Wild Bill in this story, I had no idea that that's where he was. You just wonder sort of where his head was at the time. Like he still wanted to be in the game, doing the mission. And
he had also been doing a lot of work with an organization called the Friends of Vietnam. And this was in the early 60s, late 50s and early 60s. So he remained active in a lot of circles, kind of more under the radar than he was when he was a younger man.
So Wild Bill has been in your last 3-4 books. He has played some role. Like I think about The Last 12 Miles with the Friedmans, founders of NSA. She was a Coast Guard cryptographer who was like talk about badass. And she didn't like Wild Bill.
No. He had wanted her help doing creating codes, and she was Elizabeth Friedman was very methodical and by the book, and Wild Bill was not, and so they butted heads a little bit.
He tried to recruit her though because she was badass in her own way, just not his way.
Yeah,
so.
I don't think she found him as charming as say Virginia Hall did.
Right,
so.
But I feel like in this context he was also charming. So she had an incredible. Dickey had a close connection with him because he would come up in other parts of her life.
He did, and it was toward the end of his life, and he had a lot of heart at that time, I would say. There were some issues resettling refugees, and she was not getting anywhere with the people she worked with who really let her down, and she ended up reaching out to him, and he really personally got involved and helped. So it was just nice to see that side of him. And then he died in late 50s, early 60s, right. So it was shortly before that time.
In fact, I think it was in the book.
In the book.
Yeah. Yeah, so Wild Bill was somebody who, his guiding mantra was smart people who could win in bar fights.
Yeah.
And, Dickey was...
Words to live by. Yeah.
Totally. So he liked people who were willing to take risk, willing to try new things. And she was in a role as a woman at a time where she was taking risks, but it wasn't quite treated the same. I feel like he really looked at her as... Like if he had been running the OSS, she would have she might have been a Virginia Hall kind of counterpart in the OSS.
Well, except
but
she
not
lacked subtlety. That would be her problem. But she did have a lot of heart and a lot of courage.
Right.
So
and I think he tried to help her with that.
He did, to develop that, yes.
I could talk about Wild Bill all day, so that's
great.
We'll stop now. So in the intelligence world, generating intelligence in real time is really important. Dickey risked her life to report from the front lines. What do you think drove her persistence to keep telling the truth, even when the personal costs were just so high?
Dickey always had an altruism about her. She was always looking out for the little guy. And when she got involved in combat in World War II and was in the middle of everything and seeing life and death play out, and then just trying to, when you would get information back at a tent reported from a soldier, it's like playing telephone. How does this get to you? What really happened? So for her, she would just try to get, as she would say, as far forward as I can. And that would get her to the front quite often. And then she could see it and with her own eyes. And when she could do that, she could also see in certain areas the children and the women on the periphery were suffering, how the people were living, and just really had eyes to take in the whole story. So even though she might have been there with, special forces or something, she really had a talent for seeing everything. And also early on, she realized that what she had, the level of courage, she was fearful, but she knew that to act in spite of fear is courage, and that she had that, and that that's an unusual calling. And because she didn't have any dependents, she really threw herself headfirst into it. And then in the beginning, she would get angry because of military censors not letting her publish her articles.
Oh, that's what I'm just thinking about. You
Yeah.
do all that. You risk your life.
You
go
do.
through personal injuries, suffering.
Yeah.
You're away from your family. You put
Yeah.
this all together just to be told,
No, that's not going to work. But she realized then, but it's useful for something. So then it became useful for briefings. And then later on, Kennedy is looking at Dickey's reports from Laos and making decisions. So she was able to parlay that when she couldn't always get a public article put out there. She was able to be useful for intelligence purposes, which she was happy to do.
in your research, did you actually see reporting? Because you couldn't include everything in the book.
Mhm.
Did you actually see, were there actually, in your research, you found her engaging with the national security community on,
Yes.
okay, we'll just stop there. Then.
Yes. But I will say, her first primary, she was a combat correspondent, but sometimes when she could be useful, she would be asked to be useful in certain ways. But yes.
She loved the Marines. Do you think she would have joined the Marines if she had had a...
Absolutely. Yes. She loved the Marines and they loved her. I think, I know Marines. I have good friends who are Marines and they're just wired a little different, right? If anybody here in the Marines. And Dickey's wired a little different and they just got each other. And so they really ended up adopting her, we'll say. Mm-hmm.
Which was so sweet.
Mm-hmm.
But I think she earned everything she got with them too. It wasn't that,
well, it was when she proved herself to be tough as nails and she could run the same way they could and do the same amount of push-ups and carry a camera pack and live on the field in a little backpack. They were like, all right, you can.
Which again gets to Virginia Hall. That's the same thing.
Yeah.
She was adopted too by the Special Forces community. So.
Mm-hmm.
So Dickey was one of very few women reporting from war zones at the time.
Mm-hmm.
How do you think being a woman shaped the way she saw conflict and the way others saw her?
Well, Dickey, though she didn't have any of her own children, I would describe her as very motherly. She became sort of den mothery to her boys or her Marines. She always sought out, there's a million pictures of her surrounded by a bunch of Cuban children, a bunch of Vietnamese children. She always found the little children and played the games with them and taught them to do the twist. And wherever she was in the world, she was very much drawn to that. And had just a very sweet side to her and really, again, was taking in the whole lay of the land. Somebody asked her, do you think women belong in war zones? And she said, absolutely not, but neither do men. So she always had an and a different thing to think about. And also she didn't really take no for an answer. She was bullied quite a bit as a little girl and she never let it get her down too much. She would just sort of pivot until she could find the place where she fit in. So if somebody told her no here, she would go there. And when she was trying to get her war accreditation, Colonel Dupuy at the War Department was stammering his way. He was trying to figure out how to say to this 19-year-old girl in front of him that women have various issues that men don't, and there are no facilities in the field. And she says to this 53-year-old man, the 14th Infantry has solved much harder problems than this, and I'm quite confident they're going to lick this one too. And so he's like, all right, I'll send you. So she just always had a snappy response and really kind of wore people down. She drove them crazy until they finally would just say, all right, So
Sounds a lot like Virginia Hall, though, when
Yeah.
trying to get to State Department.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just knock on another door. Somebody will let you in.
That's, so a couple of questions related to this. So she was married. That was, not the best relationship.
No. Yeah.
But
Mhm.
throughout the story, he alludes to him being the reason that she was able to get sort of to where she was. Was there a little bit of that, you think?
Yeah, so Tony Chapelle, he was in the Navy. He was a photographer for the Navy during the Great War at the time, and then became a photography teacher and a pilot. She meets him when she's about 19 and he's about 40. And she took his photography classes, and he really did teach her a lot about photography and developed, for lack of a better word, pun intended, her talent and the way she had a very unique way of seeing things. So in the beginning, that was very helpful to her because originally she was a journalist. She reported on aviation, but he really opened up the photography side, and that's what got her closer to the front in World War II because they had a dozen female journalists, but they didn't have many female photojournalists. So she was able to get a different and a better access because she was that. She did learn photography from him, and they worked together as a team throughout post-war Europe. They would travel for different care agencies and photograph, orphans in Poland and different things like that. But after a while, he became a little
Well, she started,
toxic. Yeah.
and she was better than him in some ways, and so that was
Eventually,
which
yes.
happens,
yeah.
so
And also he couldn't
take it.
He was all over the place with, yeah.
So I have to say, I'm now going to go back after this and I'm going to look at pictures of her because I really haven't looked.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, what I have looked up, like all the books you read, I'm like, is this really true? And I look it up, and it usually is. So you actually do, for somebody who writes historical fiction, I feel like you mostly write history.
Yeah.
But I would love to look at pictures of her because she describes sort of what she's wearing, and she just sounded like she was quite stylish. I don't know if that was, for somebody who's jumping out of planes and is more comfortable in jumpsuits. She would then describe a dress that she was wearing or a piece of jewelry, and whether she had put on a little, like she seemed like she was a little bit of a girl's girl, but
yeah. And in between the war sections of the book, you see her life in Manhattan. And actually, she didn't have good style, but her best friend Stevie did. So she would send Stevie, say, "Oh, I have to go to an awards ceremony, or I have to go to this dinner with so and so. A Castro's coming. I'm at a diplomatic reception. What should I wear?" And Stevie would go shopping for her and dress her up. And Dickey loved that, but most of the time, she wanted to be like in fatigues, in combat boots. She did wear little pearl earrings because she said when people were in the field, she wanted to be able to distinguish herself from the soldiers. So that was the only thing. If you were looking across, you wouldn't know there was a difference except for her pearl earrings.
Right.
So
I love that. Your work often shines light on women in the shadows of history. We've talked about Virginia Hall and Violette, and I mean, I could name all of them. Of all the women you've written about, though, whom do you most identify with, and who do you identify with the least?
I most identify with Dickey. I don't have courage. I don't jump out of airplanes, but I am a hot mess. And I speak before I think. And I also love photography and videography. I'm sort of an amateur hobbyist on that. For me, when I record things, I like to look at them again and just remember them and document things. I was a historian in high school. Like, I've always wanted to document things. And also it feels sometimes like a little bit of a buffer when things are hard or even high emotion. I like having a camera to sort of buffer that. And I so I identify that with Dickey. And just also her compulsion to write about things and, being a writer also. And I really, again, I write fiction, but it's almost more journalism because it's biographical, it's research based. So I identify that with Dickey. The person I least identify with is probably Elizabeth Friedman. Actually, her mind was so analytical and serious, and mine is not. And and also Elizabeth, and this probably is going to come off a little strange, but when I wrote The Last 12 Miles, she's the good guy. She's on the side of the law. And then the bad guy is Marie Waite, who's a rum runner, a real woman. And I ended up sort of liking the antagonist more than the protagonist.
I did too.
And that surprised me. Elizabeth could compartmentalize her life in intelligence and what she was doing, where her husband, William, could not. So when he was breaking codes, they broke, William, who was on the ground floor at NSA, his team broke Japanese purple code. But when they broke the code, they couldn't say that they knew, as you see in some things, because then they know that you know. So you have to pick and choose where intervention is. And like William had a very hard time personally with that. It caused a number of breakdowns in his life. Elizabeth could just compartmentalize.
Right.
And I don't know how that's possible. And I'll even gender it. I don't know how a woman can compartmentalize.
I mean, I'm
So
so struck by. I'm
cold.
just sitting here thinking though,
Yeah.
and no offense to whenever you say no offense, I'm going to offend.
I'm going to
so
offend.
I apologize.
Yeah, I'm not trying to say all women.
But I mean, all the women you write about, the men are always sort of a little bit weak.
Oh, interesting. Who?
Sorry, Dave, not in your case, but So I'm just thinking that, I mean, in Elizabeth Friedman, so he was an amazing guy, but I always thought she was the alpha in that relationship.
For sure. Yeah, I guess Virginia Hall.
And
She's a big time.
yeah, and in even Maria Waite, her husband was just a complete.
He was
like
a philanderer and a drunk. Yeah. So it's interesting that I keep finding these. My husband is lovely. I've been married. I've been with him since high school. So yeah.
Virginia Hall didn't have anybody. So
no, she did. She had Paul.
Oh, she did.
But she was the
married
alpha.
the French man.
Paul stayed home and he took care of the dogs, and she was in the CIA.
She's also like 6'3", and he was.
And he was a little guy.
He was a very small French man. Yeah.
Yes.
So, but it is interesting how these women, at a time when that's not always the case.
Fascinating. Yeah. Mhm.
Did you realize you did that?
No, that's interesting.
Yeah.
I have to explore that.
Yeah.
We'll have to go into the psychology.
We
of
will.
this. Yeah.
Yes.
There you
So
go.
the cover of The Last Assignment is strikingly different from all your other novels, which often feature a woman with her back to the camera. What made you decide to choose this cover?
When historical fiction, particularly women focused, which mine tends to be, they always have the woman with the back to the camera looking out at whatever. And so when they gave me the thumbnails for this, again, there were a bunch of women in the jungles of Vietnam, or there was a lot of women with their back to the camera. And I was like, guys, let's just try something new. Let's make it really crazy and maybe just go for setting or something like that. And they came back with this, and I absolutely love it. It actually looks like a picture that Dickey took. She took a picture of a reflection in a canal in Vietnam, and it looks similar to that. And I don't know if they knew that when they made it, but as soon as I saw it, I was like, yes. And then the gold, love it.
Did you go to any of the places where she...
No, Cuba, no.
Well, no,
Hungary,
Cuba, no. Hungary, no.
and
Vietnam?
No. So that is maybe one of these days, but
I
yeah.
was going to say, are any of them on your bucket list?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's kind of
Yeah.
easier said than done. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Cuba would not be an easy place to...
Well, I was
walk around.
actually telling Ellen at dinner, I got invited with the Hemingway Foundation to go to the Finca Jiha there, but I don't think now's the right time. Maybe soon, but they can get me a 4-day visa to go visit Hemingway's house there whenever I'm ready.
And you've been to Hemingway's house in Key West.
Many times, yes.
Which is amazing.
I know, it's hard to have to do that and then write it off for a research trip, but yeah.
You really are a giver.
I am. I mean, somebody has to do it, so yeah.
The novel uses an epistolary style. Did I say that right?
Yeah.
Okay. Letters, journal entries, news articles, transcripts. That is a little... Why did you choose this format to tell this story?
Most of what I was looking at from Dickey were telegrams and letters and a transcript of a TV show. And because the book does span so much time and conflicts, they became a bridge to get from one place to the other and to cover some of the things that were happening in between. And they were almost dispatches from the field. So most of the novel are prose, but when you're getting between one section and another, very often it'll be interspersed with a little newspaper article or something like that. So you'll find out the fate of a character in a paragraph or through a telegram or something like that. And it's all based on real things, but I didn't get permission to use the real ones, so I had to fictionalize them. So they're accurate, but they're not.
It's hard to find where you've introduced fiction. You've talked about it, but again, I feel like you write like it's, and I look you up to just prove it, and you really are mostly history. So
sure, yeah.
So
but
you're pretty good at adding the fiction side of it.
The difference with a novelist is that I can, there was a character in Cuba and there were disputing timelines about when she crossed his path. Did she meet him when he was on Castro's side or when he was anti-Castro? And so I can play with that for purposes of story sometimes, or I can make a composite character. If I have a lot of when she gets to Laos and then to Vietnam, I had to do some pull through military characters because I can't have, all these different groups of people that she's with. It would bog the reader down. And I'm not here for the facts necessarily. I'm here for the emotional arc of the character.
I've asked you with this, every book I've asked, will this be the movie? Do you think, will this be the book that maybe that movie? Because this would be a great movie.
I hope so. Years ago, I found out that Jennifer Aniston, somebody wrote a screenplay about Dickey, and she had an option when she was married to Brad Pitt and whatever their production company was. Well, that dissolved. So I don't know what happened to the screenplay, but one of my friends whose husband is a filmmaker, I sent it to her, and she makes documentary. Robert Zemeckis, who did Forrest Gump, his wife is a writer. And so I'm like, Leslie, I feel like you've done women documentaries. I feel like this might be your time. And she's like, oh, I loved it. But then she never said anything else. So, but maybe one of these.
Who do you envision who would be the star? Would it be Jennifer Aniston?
I kind of see her now because I started seeing her. She wanted to play Dickey, and that was probably
I totally
10
see
years
that
ago.
would be such a.
And I can kind of see that actually. Yeah.
I keep waiting for one of your books to become a movie, but this one would be so.
Well, we'll see. I hope so. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, this is my favorite question. So writers today have a number of new tools at their disposal. Pretty much all of us have new tools at our disposal because welcome ChatGPT that you now can use for research and for drafting. Do you use AI, or are you going to use AI in the process of researching and writing? Did you use it in the last assignment? And more broadly, how do you see this technology changing the way historical fiction gets written?
No, I'm wildly anti all of that. And
Really?
yes, and I'm horrified that my books have been pirated to train AI. A lot of writers have joined I don't know if you want to call it class action, but without permission, our books were used to train AI because AI can write a novel or a screenplay in an hour. But it's kind of like when you see a photograph that is made, there's something about the uncanny about it. It's just a little off. It doesn't have the human piece. No, I think it's a horror. I absolutely hate it. And one time I went on Grok because I'm like, all right, I got to see what's going on here. And half an hour later, I was correcting it because it was giving me false information about Dickey. It said she jumped out of a helicopter onto Iwo Jima. It's like, no, she didn't. But that was Vietnam. And it's like, oh, that's right. And so I'm back and forth with this thing. And I was like, oh, this is a demon. So that's my opinion. It felt like a Ouija board. I was like, I'm having nothing to do with this.
I gotta tell you that.
And you're wrong.
As a former intelligence analyst, and there's a couple of us sitting out here, I think, man, I wish I had something like this. Not as something to write the assessment, but something that could actually maybe help you sort of start your day and figure out where you may want to drill down further into. So if you're scanning a lot of stuff, if you just want something to help you not take it and present it as your own, but to use it to sort of guide you. And
oh no, I'm like a Luddite. I'm a person from the old days. I have a paper calendar. Like the toothpaste is out of the tube with it, and it will all pass me by. But I'll just be there with my handwritten notebook and good riddance. Yeah.
Do you have any author friends that are using AI? It's just so prevalent everywhere now.
In novelists, I know it's a very anti-AI just because the work was used to train it. But it might be different in different areas. So for journalism or
the IP side of it, I could totally see.
I could see.
You spend all this time on it, and then it's just taking it. And
I could see how it could be useful. Right. For different things.
If you're going through a lot of data and you're trying to
Sure.
Yes,
and can just scan things much quicker than a human could. So, but yeah, I'm not a fan.
I could tell.
Yeah.
Well, Erika, this is where my questions end. So maybe it's time to open it up to the audience, Shannon?
Yeah. So first of all, thank you so much. That was so interesting. And Ellen, I completely agree. As I read this book, I was so captured by Dickey and Erika. You just do such a wonderful job of just making us feel like we're in there with her. And it really feels like history. I too was like looking things up, and I was like, it's all true.
And if you read all of her books, there's some connection, and it's weird because it shouldn't happen, but somehow there is. So it's like Wild Bill shows up. So
well, there's a woman who's a writer, Jacqueline Woodson. She's so great, and she said the universal is found in the specific. So the more specific a story is, we all have the same human emotions. So you see yourself, even no matter what the setting is or who the people are. So yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, if you are here in the audience, please come up to the mic there if you have any questions. I do have some online, so I can start with those as folks want to line up. But first, I had a question come in about where did the nickname Dickey come from?
Oh, that's a good one. So Dickey, when she grew up, was a little different from the girls. She always wanted to be with the boys and was always saluting flagpoles and going to the construction site with her dad, much to her mother's chagrin. And Admiral Richard Byrd, the polar explorer, the aviator, she saw a movie about his explorations and was completely smitten. And then he came to her school when she was 15 to give a speech, and he shook her hand, and she never, for like a week, she didn't wash it. And she renamed herself Dickey. And for the rest of her life, everybody called her Dickey.
Shannon, that's also interesting. Moms, like the moms of so many of your characters, have wanted their girls to be something they're not.
Yeah. My mom, she died in 2015, but she was lovely. I could do whatever I wanted. So,
all right, go right ahead.
Okay. So Dickey seems very, very different than Lee Miller. But
yes,
I'd be interested in your take on the two of them. I mean, Lee's work seemed to sort of eat her from the inside out over time. But I'm intrigued to hear from you on that.
I think there's a movie that just came out about Lee Miller. I haven't seen it. I'm dying to see it. But I don't admittedly know a lot. I've never researched Lee Miller. I've just read pieces about her. But she seemed to get consumed. And also the things that she saw, I guess during World War II, and it affected her very deeply, and I think of almost a form of post-traumatic stress that she carried with her.
Do you know when did Dickey first get into the front line on World War II? Because the movie Lee and then the traveling show that they had about her photography implied that she, at least on the British side, was one of the first women and one of the first non-military combat photographers.
Yes.
To be right in the front lines in Europe. I wasn't sure if that was true or if it was.
Yes, and Dickey was with the Pacific Fleet, so she was in Okinawa and Iwo Jima. That's where she saw hers. And actually, on Iwo Jima, one of the interesting stories there, when she was taken to the front there, the lieutenant took her to the front in a Jeep, and they're looking around, and she's like, all right, I'm going to go take some pictures. She goes to the top, and she's looking around, and she can't see anyone. It was absolutely silent. She's like, maybe he didn't understand me. And she's taking pictures and she's swatting zippy bugs away out of her ears. And 10 minutes later, goes down the ridge and the lieutenant is losing his mind. He's like, what are you doing? You stood on a ridge for 10 minutes and you had snipers on both sides trying to figure out what to do with you. They weren't bugs. They were bullets, because it's a dormant volcano. And so with Dickey, it was always things like that. So that's not necessarily personally traumatic, but like, whoo, glad I didn't get killed by a sniper. So I think for her, and she also processed things a little differently. She had a very hopeful, sunny disposition and really could endure a lot. And I do think being bullied as a young girl made her very tough. And so she would see things and she would talk about them and process them, but then she would move on. She really had a tremendous capacity for taking on trauma. But what she did see in post-war Europe, when she was photographing that, there was a situation with some orphans that scarred her very much. But again, that wasn't her main wheelhouse. So she was more on the adventure side, I would say.
Right. Okay, good. Thanks.
Great. I've got another online question here. So which photo of Dickey's do you think is the most influential, or do you find the most powerful?
Okay, so she was on both sides of the camera for a lot of pictures you'll see on the Pinterest page. I'll avoid when she's being photographed, and I'll go with hers. There is a picture that it really affected me. When she was in Vietnam, she was with a village of mostly Chinese settlers who had been sort of chased all the way down. They were chased out of communist China. And there was a young girl who did a samurai sword dance the night that a bunch of villagers, including her brother, were under ambush. And the Jeep lights were shining on this little girl, and they had her all lit up, and she has a sword, and she's probably 12 years old. And it just, I couldn't stop staring at it. And part of the theme of the book is just the endless cycle of war. And so when the children see their brother get killed or their parent get killed, and then that imprints itself, and then it creates a desire for revenge, and then they get older and they have a war. So it's like, so that seeing that little girl with the sword at a very pivotal time in the book moved me. And I highlighted that one on the Pinterest page because it really haunts me a lot. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I've already made a note to do that. So this is another one online. It's actually going back when you were talking about the Friedmans, who I must say we feature in the museum along with Virginia Hall. So if you haven't checked out the exhibits, please do. But their question is: you mentioned something about code breaking Japanese codes and then picking what situations they could address. And they are wondering if this is anything like in the film The Imitation Game, where they're showing that they broke the Enigma code and, they might know something's happening, but they don't act. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, it sounded like a similar situation. And Friedman, and this is in the biographies, so I'm not like revealing something here, but Friedman said that when William came home, when Pearl Harbor happened, he just kept saying over and over again, but they knew, but they knew, but they knew, but they knew. And he never really clarified with her because they were working in different areas. She didn't know if they knew specifically that Pearl Harbor was going to get bombed or globally something was going to get bombed. But he felt like we wanted to go to war, but we had to be drawn into war. So that's in a biography. I don't know if that's true or not. But that was the kind of intelligence that he couldn't really live with.
Well, I do remember he suffered.
Yes.
I mean, he had to go into
yes.
therapy and
Yeah, and he had a number of breakdowns,
Right.
and she took
He
really
carried a
good
lot,
care of
right.
him. They were a very sweet couple and loved each other dearly. But it took a real toll.
She's code breaking, raising kids, taking care of a husband.
Yeah. Hmm.
And then you mentioned when you got in your discussion about how much you really use the research to focus on these characters. And so one of these questions is wondering how much of a liberty do you take when depicting the character's personality? Are you really trying to stay true to those primary sources, like the personal correspondence, or do you maybe, embellish some personality traits a little bit to make it more exciting?
Well, they do tell you with fiction, it's life with the boring parts out of it. So I do try to get the highlights, but I try to stick as true to the character as possible. And I can only do that once I've read absolutely everything they've ever written and looked at every picture they've ever taken and heard their voice on a. So it takes about 6 months for me to get their voice in my ear. And then I make a decision. Can I tell this in first person point of view? Usually not. I usually can do third person. So I'm an observer. And then that leaves some space for, I can't put motives in people's minds and things like that. But with Dickey, I did feel like I got really close to her. So by the end of the book, she was able to take a recorder into combat into Vietnam and speak in it. And so the last scenes of the book are in her voice, first person, speaking into a
Oh, wow.
recorder.
That's cool.
And it just felt like a progression that was very natural in the process. But usually I do have a little bit of distance, but they are as true as I can make them. So
Is there anybody in her world still around? Is Stevie still around? Is anybody in her? Nobody's around.
No, and Tony had a stepson and he's died. Dickey's, some of her nieces and nephews are alive and they keep the archive and they try to get her story out there. So yeah, but mostly, yeah.
So it was nobody who really was directly connected to her.
Yeah, not on a regular basis. And she was all over the place. So mhm.
All right, we've got another big online question here. It's directed actually to both of you. In recent years, there have been more works about women in intelligence and national security, thinking of women of no importance, about Virginia Hall in True Face by Jonna Mendez. Does this reflect how gender attitudes have changed in intelligence and national security, or see it as a desire to correct past negligence of women's stories? And what further progress is there to be made?
Wait, this is questions to
For
me?
both of you.
Oh,
It's for
Do
both
you want
of
to
you.
do you want to get
no,
going?
you got.
Well, I was going to say one thing that's interesting about World War II is a lot of the archives are being declassified because enough time has gone by. So we're finding these women's stories, and I've been continually astonished, I would say. With Prohibition, the assistant DA of Miami, the head of the rum runner, the queen of the rum runners, head cryptanalyst, there were women in quite a few roles. So I was interested, but a lot of it is declassification. But others, I found with Virginia Hall, she always felt like she had a bit of an advantage because when a woman can sort of disappear and not be suspected as a spy as much. And so she felt like it was an asset at the time. So it's just, I don't know. It's very interesting. I'm not sure if chicken or the egg, but I know there's a lot that's being declassified. So we're learning more that we didn't know before.
Now, I remember the story. I had a former boss. I won't mention her name, but she was advised to when we were fighting the war on terrorism. She was encouraged to wear a hijab when she was over in Saudi, and she was encouraged not to. She chose to, and I remember her relaying that she's at the markets walking around. She found it oddly powerful, to be invisible. That there was something to walking around a market. She could see and listen to conversations that she could never have had she been wearing Western clothes. I know that's an odd way to look at it, but I remember thinking that's such an interesting perspective.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
All right. Well, I've got another one, and this might be a great question to potentially end on, because the question is, have you decided what to write about next, and how did you settle on that topic? Can you share it with us?
That's
I
a great
tried.
question. That's a great question. I can tell you some of it. I will tell you, I have this obsession with Cuba, and I have an obsession with women in intelligence, and there's more to the story there. So that's what I'm working on now. I'm not under contract just yet. I'm still only a third of the way through the book. So I'm going to keep plowing through and see where it leads, but it's fascinating.
All right. Well, that's kind of leaving us on the edge of our seats and wanting more. And with that, I just want to, give a big thank you to both of you, Ellen and Erika. You guys were fantastic. Thank you so much.